Sherlock Holmes and the Case of the Stranger at Gaslight Bridge. Chapter 1. The Figure Beneath the Lamps. It is with some hesitation that I commit the particulars of this singular affair to paper. Many years have passed since the events I am about to describe, and yet the memory of that strange autumn evening remains as vivid to me as the glow of a gas lamp seen through London fog. Among the many remarkable cases in which I had the privilege of accompanying my friend Sherlock Holmes, few possessed such an unusual mixture of mystery, tragedy, and calculated deception. Indeed, when I first heard the details, I considered the matter little more than a curious police puzzle. Before it concluded, however, it had become one of the most perplexing investigations ever to engage the powers of Sherlock Holmes. The affair began upon the 23rd day of October, in the year 1894. The weather had turned disagreeable. A damp mist drifted from the Thames and curled through the streets of Westminster, softening every outline and transforming familiar thoroughfares into ghostly passages of shadow and light. Holmes and I were seated in our rooms at Baker Street. My companion lounged upon the sofa, long fingers joined beneath his chin, while a chemical apparatus bubbled quietly upon the side table. The room smelled faintly of tobacco and laboratory acids. For my own part, I was occupied with a medical journal. Neither of us spoke for nearly half an hour. At last Holmes suddenly rose. "Watson," said he. "Yes? How long has our visitor been standing across the street?" I looked up in surprise. "Our visitor?" Holmes pointed lazily toward the window. I crossed to it. Through the fog, I could just discern a dark figure standing beneath a lamp-post opposite Baker Street. The man appeared motionless. His collar was raised. His hat concealed most of his features. For all the world he looked like a shadow cut from the night itself. "I should not have noticed him at all," said I. "Naturally. You know who he is?" "No." "Then how?" Holmes smiled. "My dear Watson, I did not say I knew who he was. I merely observed that he has remained in precisely the same position for 22 minutes. 22? 23 now." I stared. "How can you possibly know that?" "Because the milk cart passed at 7 minutes past 8. The gentleman was already present. The tobacconist closed his shutters at 28 minutes past 8. He remained. The constable crossed the road 3 times during that interval. Still he remained." I shook my head. "There are moments, Holmes, when I believe you possess eyes in the back of your head." "No, only a habit of observation." As though our unseen watcher had heard his name spoken, the figure suddenly moved. He stepped from beneath the lamp, crossed the street, and a moment later there came a knock at the door. Mrs. Hudson announced the visitor. The man entered. Even now I can picture him clearly. He was perhaps 40 years of age, tall and spare, with a pale, anxious face. His clothes were respectable though not fashionable. What struck me most was the expression in his eyes. Fear. Not ordinary nervousness, not embarrassment, genuine fear. He removed his gloves with trembling fingers. "Mr. Sherlock Holmes?" Holmes inclined his head. "You have come regarding the occurrence at Gaslight Bridge." The stranger froze. The colour drained from his face. "Good God! It is elementary. You know why I am here. I know why any gentleman waits 23 minutes before entering Baker Street on a foggy night. He is uncertain whether to involve himself in a dangerous matter." The man sank heavily into a chair. "My name is Edwin Mercer." "Please proceed, Mr. Mercer." The visitor glanced over his shoulder before speaking. What followed immediately captured my full attention. "3 nights ago," said he, "I witnessed something upon Gaslight Bridge." The room fell silent. Gaslight Bridge was a narrow iron crossing spanning a lesser branch of the Thames east of Westminster. Though not especially notorious, it had acquired a gloomy reputation owing to several accidents over the years. "What did you witness?" Holmes asked. Mercer swallowed. "A man. That seems commonplace. Not this man." Holmes's eyes narrowed slightly. "Continue." "I was returning home shortly before midnight. The fog was thick, visibility was poor. As I crossed the bridge, I observed a gentleman standing beside the eastern railing. Alone. Entirely alone. What was remarkable about him? Mercer hesitated. When I approached, he turned toward me. "And?" He asked me the date. "The date?" "Yes." Holmes remained expressionless. Mercer continued. He seemed confused, distressed. I informed him it was the 20th of October. What happened then? He stared at me. The man wiped moisture from his forehead. I cannot adequately describe his expression. Attempt it. It was as though he had received dreadful news. Holmes leaned forward. "Go on." He asked whether I was certain of the date. "Precisely." "And then?" Mercer's voice dropped. He said, "Then I am too late." A curious statement. Even Holmes appeared mildly interested. "What followed?" he asked. The man removed a pocket watch. "Yes?" He looked at it, closed it, then climbed over the railing. I sat upright. "You mean he jumped?" "No." Mercer shook his head violently. "That is precisely the strange part." "Explain." He climbed onto the outer side of the bridge. Indeed, he stood there calmly. "And?" Mercer's hands tightened. Then he vanished. For several moments nobody spoke. "Vanished?" I repeated. "Yes." "Fell into the river?" "No splash." "Descended by ladder?" "No ladder." "You are certain?" I rushed forward instantly. There was nowhere he could have gone. I glanced at Holmes. His eyes had become very bright. "Interesting," he murmured. Mercer nodded rapidly. I thought perhaps the fog had confused me. I convinced myself there must be a rational explanation. A wise assumption. Unfortunately, the matter did not end there. Holmes steepled his fingers. "No?" Mercer's face grew even paler. "This morning I opened the newspaper and discovered." The visitor reached into his coat. He produced a folded clipping. Holmes accepted it. His gaze moved rapidly across the page. For the first time that evening I saw genuine surprise flicker across his features. He handed the article to me. The headline read, "Prominent solicitor found dead." Beneath it appeared a photograph. I looked from the newspaper to Mercer, then back again. The blood seemed to drain from my own face. For the man pictured in the article was unmistakably the stranger upon Gaslight Bridge, and according to the report, he had died 6 days before Mercer claimed to have spoken with him. Far from being alive on the 20th of October, the solicitor's body had been recovered from his locked study on the 14th. A dead man had apparently been seen wandering London nearly a week after his death. Holmes rose abruptly. The familiar expression had appeared upon his face, the look which signalled that his mind had found a worthy challenge. "Watson," said he quietly. "Yes?" "I believe we shall visit Gaslight Bridge." Outside, the fog pressed against the windows like a living thing, and somewhere within that sea of drifting grey waited the first clue to a mystery that would soon place several lives in danger and reveal a deception more intricate than any of us could yet imagine. Chapter 2. The Dead Man's Footsteps. The following morning dawned beneath a canopy of low clouds which cast a melancholy pall over London. A persistent drizzle had begun before sunrise and showed little inclination to cease. The pavements glistened black beneath the gas lamps, while passing carriages sent fans of muddy water across the curbstones. At breakfast I found Holmes in an unusually contemplative mood. He sat beside the window, untouched coffee cooling at his elbow, while several newspapers lay scattered across the table. Without looking up, he addressed me. "You have formed a theory, Watson." "I confess I have." "Excellent. What is it?" I settled into my chair. Our visitor encountered a man who merely resembled the deceased solicitor. Holmes nodded. "A natural conclusion. Indeed, it seems the most likely." "Continue." The resemblance was striking enough to deceive Mr. Mercer. The fog concealed details. The stranger's peculiar remarks added to the illusion. Holmes folded a newspaper. "A respectable hypothesis, but," he smiled faintly, "but it fails to explain 3 matters, which are: First, why would an impostor choose to impersonate a dead solicitor whom he had never met? Second, why appear upon an isolated bridge at midnight? Third, and most importantly, why disappear? I admitted that these questions troubled me. Holmes rose. Come, Watson, let us see whether the bridge itself offers answers. Gaslight Bridge lay some distance eastward along a lesser branch of the Thames. The structure was neither large nor impressive. A narrow iron crossing, it linked two aging districts of warehouses and riverside businesses. Time and weather had left their mark upon the metalwork. Rust stained portions of the railing, while the wooden walkway creaked beneath each footstep. The bridge earned its curious name from 4 gas lamps positioned at equal intervals along its span. Even in daylight they remained visible, black iron posts rising like sentinels above the river. We found the place nearly deserted. Only a pair of dock workers crossed from the southern bank, while a barge drifted lazily beneath the arches. Holmes immediately began his examination. To the casual observer, the bridge contained nothing remarkable. To Holmes, however, every inch seemed worthy of study. He moved slowly from one end to the other, examined bolts, measured distances with his gaze, inspected scratches upon the railings. Twice he crouched to inspect the wooden planks. I had accompanied him long enough to avoid interrupting these moments of concentrated observation. At length he stopped near the eastern side. The location. You are certain? Mr. Mercer described the lamp, the angle of approach, the position of the river traffic. It could only have been here. I joined him beside the railing. The water flowed perhaps 20 feet below, dark and sluggish. Not a pleasant place in which to fall. Holmes ran his fingers along the ironwork. Then he smiled. Aha! What have you found? An inconsistency. I peered closely. I see nothing. Precisely why criminals flourish. He indicated a section of railing. Observe. The iron was weathered. Rust covered most surfaces. Yet one narrow area appeared brighter, cleaner, recently disturbed. I bent forward. You mean this patch? Exactly. Perhaps someone leaned against it. Not someone. Who then? A person wearing gloves. I stared. Holmes tapped the metal lightly. The residue of oil remains. From leather? Excellent, Watson. You believe the stranger climbed over the railing? He certainly did, and left this mark, without question. Then perhaps Mercer spoke the truth after all. He spoke the truth as he understood it. Holmes fell silent. His eyes drifted toward the riverbank below. Several moments passed. Then he abruptly turned away. Let us visit the deceased gentleman. The deceased gentleman? The solicitor. His body was recovered days ago. Quite. Then where shall we find him? Holmes smiled. At home. The late solicitor was one Mr. Julian Blackthorne. His residence stood in Kensington, occupying a respectable position upon a quiet avenue lined with elm trees. The house itself reflected wealth without ostentation. A brass plate beside the entrance identified its former owner. A black mourning ribbon had been tied discreetly around the knocker. The door was opened by an elderly butler. His face bore the weary expression common among servants after a death within the household. Holmes presented his card. We wish to ask several questions regarding Mr. Blackthorne. The servant hesitated. Are you from the police, sir? No. Then I am uncertain whether... A woman's voice interrupted. Show them in, Parker. We turned. A lady had appeared in the hallway. She was perhaps 35 years of age. Elegant. Composed. Yet there lingered about her eyes signs of recent grief. I am Mrs. Evelyn Blackthorne, she said. My husband's widow. Holmes bowed. My condolences. Thank you. She studied him carefully. I know your name, Mr. Holmes. That is occasionally useful. A faint smile touched her lips. You may ask your questions. We were conducted into a drawing room overlooking a small garden. Rain tapped softly against the windows. Holmes wasted little time. Your husband died on the 14th. Yes. How was he discovered? Mrs. Blackthorne clasped her hands. In his study. By whom? Myself. You entered the room. shortly after 9 in the morning, and found him dead. Yes, her voice trembled slightly. The physician stated that death occurred during the previous evening. Natural causes? No. A shadow crossed her face. He had been struck on the head. I exchanged a glance with Holmes. This detail had not appeared prominently in the newspaper report. A murder investigation, then? Yes. Has anyone been arrested? No. Holmes nodded thoughtfully. Tell me about your husband. She seemed surprised. In what sense? In every sense, Mrs. Blackthorne considered. He was diligent, reserved, extremely methodical. A man of habits. Very much so. Enemies? None that I knew. Business disputes? Occasionally. Financial troubles? Never. Holmes studied her face. Did he appear worried during the days preceding his death? A pause. Very brief, yet Holmes noticed it. So did I. Perhaps slightly. About what? I cannot say. Did he mention anyone by name? No. Another pause. Another hesitation. Holmes changed direction suddenly. Did your husband own a silver pocket watch? Her eyes widened. Yes. The reaction was unmistakable. Holmes remained perfectly calm. A family heirloom. How did you know that? Please answer. Yes. Where is it now? Mrs. Blackthorne looked genuinely perplexed. It disappeared. When? After his death. From the study? Yes. Holmes leaned back. The room grew very quiet. Outside, rain continued its steady rhythm. At last he rose. You have been most helpful, madam. Is that all? For the moment. As we approached the door, she spoke again. Mr. Holmes. He turned. If you discover who killed my husband. Her composure faltered. Please do not allow them to escape. Holmes bowed slightly. I shall do my utmost. We had scarcely reached the street when I addressed him. The missing watch? Yes. You seem interested. Very. Why? Holmes drew his coat tighter against the rain. Because, Watson, our witness described a man upon the bridge examining a silver pocket watch immediately before he vanished. I stopped walking. The implication struck me instantly. You believe it was Blackthorne's watch? I consider it probable. Then someone stole it after the murder. Precisely. And later appeared upon the bridge carrying it. Excellent. I felt a surge of excitement. The case is beginning to make sense. On the contrary, Holmes's expression grew unexpectedly grave. It is becoming far more complicated. Why? He glanced back toward the Blackthorne residence. Because Mrs. Blackthorne has just lied to us. I stared. About what? That, my dear Watson, his eyes narrowed thoughtfully, is precisely what I intend to discover. And with those cryptic words, Holmes hailed a passing cab, while the rain-soaked streets of London carried us toward the next stage of a mystery whose shadows were only beginning to emerge. Chapter 3. The Locked Study and the Crimson Ledger. The drive back toward Kensington was conducted in near silence. Such intervals were not uncommon during an investigation. Holmes possessed the curious ability to withdraw entirely into his own thoughts, leaving the outside world to proceed unnoticed around him. I had learned not to disturb him during these periods. The wheels of our cab rattled over rain-darkened streets while London passed before us in blurred impressions of umbrellas, shop fronts, and gas lamps glowing against the grey afternoon. At length Holmes spoke. Watson. Yes? What was Mrs. Blackthorne's strongest emotion? I considered. Grief. No. Anxiety. Closer. Fear. Holmes nodded. Precisely. You believe she fears the murderer? No. Then what? He tapped the window thoughtfully. She fears the truth. I frowned. Those are not necessarily the same thing. In this case, they may be. The cab slowed. We had reached our destination. Not the Blackthorne residence, however. Instead, Holmes had directed the driver to a narrow lane running behind the property. A row of garden walls bordered the road. Rainwater dripped steadily from overhanging branches. What are we doing here? I asked. Holmes stepped from the cab, examining the rear of the house. Without permission? My dear Watson, permission is frequently a luxury unavailable to investigators. With that, he strode toward a high brick wall. I followed reluctantly. The rear garden of the Blackthorn residence backed onto the lane. Through gaps in the foliage I could glimpse the windows of the house. Holmes produced a small field glass. You came prepared. I generally do. He surveyed the property. Several minutes passed. Then he lowered the instrument. Interesting. What is the study? What about it? It occupies the corner room. Yes. Observe the window. I looked. Rain streaked the glass. Nothing appeared unusual. I see nothing. Naturally. Holmes handed me the field glass. Examine the lower sash. I did so. Almost immediately I noticed it. A faint mark, a scratch, small but distinct, running vertically near the frame. What made it? Excellent question. Holmes reclaimed the glass. More importantly, when was it made? I waited. He smiled. Recently. How can you tell? The exposed wood beneath the paint remains pale. I stared. Once pointed out, the fact seemed obvious. You think someone forced the window? I know someone did. Before the murder? Possibly. After? Also possible. The mystery deepened. If the study window had been tampered with, the police should surely have discovered it. Unless... A thought occurred to me. Perhaps they never examined the exterior. Just so. Holmes turned away. Let us see the interior. The official investigation had been conducted by Inspector Lestrade of Scotland Yard. Accordingly, our next destination was Scotland Yard itself. We found Lestrade seated behind a desk piled high with reports. His sharp features immediately assumed an expression of irritation. Holmes, my dear Lestrade, I suppose you've come to interfere. I prefer the term assist. The inspector snorted. You always do. Despite years of acquaintance, the relationship between Holmes and Lestrade remained a curious blend of rivalry and mutual respect. Lestrade knew better than most men that Holmes's conclusions often proved correct. Unfortunately, he also disliked being reminded of the fact. What brings you here? He asked. The Blackthorn murder. Lestrade sighed heavily. I might have guessed. Then you will save time by answering my questions. The inspector folded his arms. Very well. Was the study locked? Yes. From the inside? Yes. And the key? Found upon the desk. Holmes nodded. A classic locked room problem. Not much of one. No. We believe Blackthorn admitted his killer voluntarily. Before locking the room. Exactly. Holmes glanced at me. Reasonable. Lestrade looked faintly pleased. We searched thoroughly. The window. Locked. Any signs of forced entry? None. Holmes made no comment. Who inherited Blackthorn's estate? His widow. Entirely? Almost. Lestrade opened a file. A few charitable donations. The remainder goes to Mrs. Blackthorn. Holmes nodded again. Any unusual discoveries among the deceased's papers? Lestrade hesitated. There was one thing. Indeed, a ledger. The word immediately caught Holmes's attention. A financial ledger? Yes. Where is it? Lestrade frowned. Missing. Missing. It disappeared shortly after the murder. Holmes exchanged a glance with me. A missing pocket watch. A missing ledger. Neither could be coincidence. What did the ledger contain? Holmes asked. We don't know. Nothing at all. The cover was recovered. The cover? Yes. Lestrade opened a drawer. A moment later he produced an object wrapped in brown paper. Holmes unfolded it carefully. Inside lay the remains of a small book. The pages had been removed. Only the binding survived. The leather was deep red, almost crimson, a peculiar colour, Holmes remarked. Quite. Where was it found? In the fireplace. Burned? Someone attempted to destroy it, yet failed. Apparently. Holmes examined the object closely. Then, to my surprise, he lifted it toward his nose. What are you doing? Smelling it. Lestrade rolled his eyes. There he goes. Holmes ignored him. Several moments later he smiled. A valuable habit. You've learned something? I asked. Indeed. What? The ledger was not burned in the study. Both Lestrade and I stared. How can you know that? Holmes tapped the leather. The odour. Odour? Coal smoke. Lestrade frowned. So? The Blackthorn residence uses seasoned oak in its fireplaces. How do you know? I observed the wood basket. Lestrade groaned. Holmes continued. This binding carries traces of coal soot instead. The inspector's expression changed. You mean someone burned it elsewhere? Attempted to, and later placed it in the fireplace. Exactly. For several seconds nobody spoke. Then Lestrade muttered something uncomplimentary under his breath. Holmes handed back the binding. Anything else missing? The inspector checked his notes. No, nothing whatsoever. Nothing of importance. Holmes's eyes narrowed. Inspector, in my experience, that phrase usually conceals something important. Lestrade sighed. There was a letter, torn into pieces. Recovered, partially. May I see it? Another drawer opened. Several fragments of paper appeared. Holmes spread them across the desk. Most contained only isolated words. Yet one sentence fragment remained legible. Must meet before the 20th. Holmes immediately became alert. The 20th? Meaning, I am not yet certain. His gaze moved across the remaining scraps. Then suddenly he froze. For an instant I saw the unmistakable expression which appeared whenever Holmes encountered a clue of exceptional significance. What is it? I asked. He did not answer. Instead, he carefully picked up one particular fragment. Upon it appeared only 2 handwritten words. Gaslight Bridge. We departed Scotland Yard shortly before dusk. The rain had ceased. Fog once more drifted across the city. For several minutes Holmes remained unusually quiet. At last I spoke. The bridge was mentioned in the letter. Yes. And the meeting was to occur before the 20th. Correct. The very date mentioned by the stranger. Precisely. I felt excitement mounting. The pieces were beginning to align. The dead solicitor arranged a meeting at Gaslight Bridge. Perhaps. The meeting never occurred. Perhaps. Then the stranger Mercer saw was connected to it. Holmes stopped abruptly upon the pavement. His eyes gleamed. Watson. Yes? What if the meeting did occur? I blinked. But Blackthorn was already dead. According to whom? The physician? The police? The newspaper? Holmes smiled faintly. An impressive collection of authorities. You doubt them? I doubt everything. Before I could reply, a boy came racing around the corner. A newspaper seller. He thrust an evening edition toward us. Latest news, sir. Holmes purchased a copy. The moment he unfolded it, his expression hardened. What is it? Without a word, he handed me the paper. A brief article occupied the lower corner. The headline was small, yet its significance struck me instantly. Unknown man found dead near Thames. The body had been discovered less than half a mile from Gaslight Bridge. No identification. No witnesses. No apparent motive. I looked up. Holmes was already staring into the fog. The familiar fire had returned to his eyes. The game advances, he murmured, and for the first time since the case began, I sensed that someone else, someone hidden within the shadows of London, had begun making moves of their own. The mystery of Gaslight Bridge had claimed its second victim. Chapter 4. The Man in the River Fog. The discovery of a second body transformed what had seemed an unusual murder inquiry into something far more dangerous. By the following morning, the case occupied the attention of both Scotland Yard and the London press. Newspapers carried speculation of every variety. Some suggested a criminal conspiracy operating along the Thames. Others proposed a connection to political intrigue. One particularly imaginative journalist hinted darkly at secret societies and foreign agents. Holmes, naturally, ignored them all. "The press," said he over breakfast, "is a magnificent machine for converting ignorance into certainty." I laughed. "And yet you read every newspaper in London, only to discover what nonsense my opponents are likely to believe." The fog had returned during the night. Dense grey vapours drifted past the windows of Baker Street, swallowing the opposite side of the road. Holmes had risen unusually early. Several maps lay spread across the table. He was studying them when Mrs. Hudson entered carrying a visiting card. "A gentleman to see you, Mr. Holmes." Holmes accepted the card. His eyebrows rose. "Show him in." A few moments later, our visitor entered. He was a broad-shouldered man of perhaps 50 years. His beard was carefully trimmed. His clothing suggested prosperity. Yet his face bore unmistakable signs of distress. "Mr. Nathaniel Crowe," Holmes read from the card. The man nodded. "You know my name?" The card assisted me considerably. Despite his evident anxiety, Crowe managed a weak smile. "I have come concerning Julian Blackthorne. Please sit down." The visitor complied. "You knew him well?" "For nearly 20 years. A friend?" "Business associate." Holmes steepled his fingers. "And now?" Crowe hesitated. "Now I fear I may be next." The room became very still. Holmes regarded him intently. "Explain." Crowe reached into his coat. His hand trembled slightly. From an inner pocket he withdrew an envelope. "I received this yesterday." Holmes accepted it. The envelope contained a single sheet of paper. Upon it appeared a short, handwritten message. "I shall never forget the words. The 20th has passed. You were warned. One remains. No signature, no explanation, nothing further." Holmes read it twice, then a third time. "Interesting." Crowe leaned forward. "Do you know what it means?" "Not yet. It must concern Julian." "Why?" The man appeared startled. "Because he received a similar message." Holmes's eyes sharpened immediately. "When?" "A week before his death." "Are you certain?" "Absolutely." "Did you see it?" "Yes." "What did it say?" Crowe closed his eyes briefly, recalling the wording. The message read, "The 20th approaches. Fulfill your obligation. Failure will have consequences." Holmes exchanged a quick glance with me. The 20th again. Always the 20th. The date seemed to sit at the centre of everything. "What obligation?" Holmes asked. "I don't know. You never discussed it." Julian refused. "Refused?" He became extremely agitated whenever the subject arose. Crowe hesitated. There was something else. "Go on." "He began carrying a revolver." Holmes raised an eyebrow. "That is unusual for a solicitor." "Precisely." "Did he fear someone?" "I believe so." "Whom?" "I cannot say." Holmes leaned back. "And now you have received a similar warning." "Yes." Crowe swallowed nervously. "Mr. Holmes, I am not a coward, yet I cannot dismiss the possibility that Julian's death and this message are connected." "I agree." The man's face paled. "You do?" "Entirely." After Crowe departed, Holmes remained standing beside the fireplace. For several minutes he said nothing. At length I broke the silence. "You believe his fears are justified?" "Undoubtedly." "And the messages?" "They are genuine." "You've determined that already." "Observe the ink." I examined the note. "The ink?" "Common writing ink purchased in bulk." I frowned. "That tells us little." "On the contrary." Holmes took the paper. "The sender wishes to appear anonymous." "Naturally." Yet he made no effort to disguise the source of the stationery. I looked again. Sure enough, faint impressions remained upon the corner. A stationer's mark, one nearly invisible unless viewed at an angle. "You notice that instantly?" "I notice everything." His eyes drifted toward the window. "The question is not who sent the message." "It isn't?" "No." "Then what is?" "Why the 20th?" By midday, we found ourselves once again travelling eastward. This time our destination lay near the docks. Holmes wished to investigate the unidentified body recovered beside the Thames. Inspector Lestrade met us at the mortuary. His mood was particularly sour. "You're becoming a habit, Holmes." "I have been accused of worse." Lestrade led us inside. The building smelled faintly of disinfectant and damp stone. A sheet-covered form rested upon a metal table. The inspector pulled back the covering. The dead man appeared to be in his early 30s. His clothing was ordinary, No papers had been found upon him, no valuables, no identifying marks. "What killed him?" Holmes asked. "Blow to the head." My eyes immediately met Holmes's. The same method, the similarity was impossible to ignore. Lestrade nodded grimly. "You noticed?" "Indeed." "Likewise no witnesses." "No robbery?" "Nothing." Holmes studied the body carefully. Several minutes passed. Then he bent closer. "What is this?" Lestrade frowned. "What?" Holmes pointed. A small stain marked the man's cuff. Dark red, almost brown. "Blood?" I suggested. "No." Holmes touched it lightly, then smelled his fingertip. A habit which would have disgusted most physicians. "Not blood." "What then?" He smiled. "Wine." Lestrade stared. "Wine. A very specific variety. You cannot possibly know that." "Port," the inspector groaned. "Of course it's port." Holmes ignored the sarcasm. His attention remained fixed upon the cuff. Then he examined the opposite sleeve. A second stain. Identical. His eyes brightened. "Remarkable." "What is?" "The man attended a dinner." Lestrade folded his arms. "And you know that because of the stains?" "In part." "Explain." "He spilled wine twice." "That proves nothing. It proves he was drinking in company." "Why?" "Because men dining alone seldom spill port on both sleeves." I laughed despite the grim setting. Lestrade looked unconvinced. Holmes continued his examination. Then suddenly he froze. The change was immediate. His gaze fixed upon the dead man's left hand. "What have you found?" I asked. Without answering, Holmes lifted the hand gently. A faint mark encircled one finger, the pale indentation left by a ring worn for many years. Yet no ring remained. Holmes looked thoughtful, very thoughtful. "Interesting." Lestrade sighed. "You keep saying that, because the case keeps earning the description." We emerged from the mortuary shortly after 3 o'clock. The fog had thickened considerably. River traffic sounded as distant whistles somewhere beyond the grey curtain. For nearly half an hour Holmes walked without speaking. At last he stopped beside a warehouse. "Watson." "Yes?" "How many men have received warnings?" I counted mentally. "Blackthorne." 1. "Crow." 2. "The dead man." "Possibly." Holmes nodded. "Very possibly." "You think all three are connected?" "I am becoming certain of it." "How?" He turned toward the river. "Because the killer is following a list." A chill ran through me. "A list?" "Yes. Of intended victims." "Precisely. And Crow is one of them." "Almost certainly." The implications were alarming. "If that is true, we must protect him." "Agreed." "Then why are we standing here?" Holmes glanced toward the fog-shrouded water. "Because I suspect there is another name." Before I could respond, a voice emerged from the mist. "Mr. Holmes?" We turned. A figure approached. Tall, thin, poorly dressed. His face remained partly concealed by shadow. He appeared nervous, almost frightened. "You are Sherlock Holmes?" he asked. "I am." The stranger looked over his shoulder repeatedly, as though fearing pursuit. "I have information." Holmes remained calm. "Concerning Blackthorne?" "Yes." "And the messages?" The man nodded. His hands shook visibly. "I know who sent them." For a moment neither Holmes nor I spoke. The stranger swallowed. "I should never have come." "Why?" "Because, if they discover I've talked," his voice faltered. "Who?" The man leaned closer. His face had become deathly pale. The circle of a deafening crack split the air. The stranger jerked violently. His eyes widened in shock. Then he collapsed onto the pavement. I dropped to my knees instantly. A dark stain spread across his coat. Gunshot. Holmes spun toward the fog. Somewhere beyond the warehouses, footsteps echoed briefly, then vanished. The killer had struck again, and the one man who appeared ready to reveal the truth now lay dying at our feet. As the river fog swallowed the unseen assassin, Holmes's expression became harder than I had seen since the case began. For the first time, The enemy had attacked within arm's reach, and the war behind the mystery of Gaslight Bridge had finally emerged from the shadows. Chapter 5: The Circle and the Missing Name. For several seconds after the gunshot, all was confusion. The wounded stranger lay upon the pavement, while the fog drifted around us like smoke upon a battlefield. A small crowd began to gather from nearby warehouses and riverside workshops. Voices rose in alarm. I knelt beside the fallen man. "He's alive!" I called. Holmes had already disappeared into the mist. I caught only a glimpse of his tall figure as he sprinted toward the direction from which the shot had come. The stranger's breathing was shallow. Blood stained the front of his coat. Fortunately, the wound appeared to be in the shoulder rather than the chest. I tore open the fabric and made a rapid examination. "Can you hear me?" I asked. His eyelids fluttered. "Yes. Do not attempt to move." His lips trembled. "The letter." "What letter?" "The office." "What office?" He struggled to focus. I leaned closer. "Who shot you?" His eyes widened with fear. "The circle." Then consciousness left him. An ambulance carriage was summoned. By the time the injured man had been transported to a nearby hospital, Holmes returned. His expression told me immediately that the pursuit had failed. "No luck?" I asked. "None." "You saw the assassin?" "Only briefly." "What did he look like?" "A dark overcoat, medium height, excellent knowledge of the district. He escaped." "Quite thoroughly." Holmes glanced toward the departing ambulance. "How is our witness?" "He will live." "Good." Unfortunately, he revealed very little. Holmes smiled faintly. "On the contrary." I stared. He merely said, "The circle." "Exactly." "And?" "That is considerably more than we possessed an hour ago." We visited the hospital later that evening. The wounded man had regained consciousness but remained weak. A police constable guarded the door. Lestrade arrived shortly after we did. His face suggested that he was rapidly losing patience with the entire affair. "Another shooting." "Indeed," said Holmes. "Another witness." "Quite." "Another dead end." Holmes smiled. "I wouldn't be too certain." The injured stranger identified himself as Arthur Finch. He worked as a clerk for a shipping firm near the docks. At Holmes's request, Lestrade permitted us a brief interview. Finch lay propped against several pillows. His complexion remained pale. Yet the terror I had observed earlier had not diminished. If anything, it had deepened. "You wished to tell me something," Holmes began. Finch nodded weakly. "I did." "Concerning Blackthorne?" "Yes." "And a group called the Circle?" The man's eyes darted nervously toward the door. "They'll kill me." "Perhaps." The blunt reply startled him. "But they will certainly kill you if we remain ignorant." For a moment Finch appeared uncertain whether to be offended or impressed. Finally he sighed. "I suppose you're right. Begin at the beginning." The clerk swallowed. 3 years ago I worked elsewhere." "Where?" "A legal office." "Whose office?" "Julian Blackthorne's." Holmes became immediately attentive. "Go on." "I handled correspondence." "Important correspondence." "Occasionally." "And?" Finch hesitated. "One evening I discovered several letters." "What sort of letters?" They referred repeatedly to something called the Circle. My pulse quickened. At last we possessed a tangible lead. "What was the Circle?" Holmes asked. "I don't know." "You never learned?" "No." "Continue." Finch shifted painfully. The letters mentioned meetings. "Where?" "I never saw locations, names, only initials." Holmes frowned. "How many initials?" "4." A silence followed. "4. Blackthorne, Crow, the unidentified dead man, and one more." The implication seemed obvious. Holmes apparently reached the same conclusion. "Did Blackthorne belong to this circle?" "I believe so." "You believe?" "I never saw direct proof." "Yet?" "He received letters constantly." "And Crow?" Finch nodded. "I saw his name." "What about the unidentified man found near the river?" Finch shook his head. "I don't know." Holmes leaned forward. "Who else?" The clerk's face tightened. "I can't remember." Try. There was another name. Yes, I saw it many times. What was it? Finch closed his eyes. Several moments passed. Then frustration crossed his features. I can't recall. Holmes looked disappointed. So close. I know. Finch opened his eyes. There is something else. Go on. Blackthorne kept records. The ledger. The clerk nodded instantly. Yes. Did you see it? Frequently. What did it contain? I don't know. You never looked. It was always locked. Locked? In a small iron box. That caught Holmes's attention. A locked box. Yes. Where is the box now? I have no idea. Holmes exchanged a glance with me. A missing ledger was one thing. A missing iron box suggested deliberate concealment, perhaps even something more valuable than simple financial records. When we departed the hospital, Holmes appeared unusually thoughtful. The fog had finally lifted. For the first time in days, stars were visible overhead. Well, I asked, we advance. Meaning, the circle existed. Certainly. Blackthorne belonged to it. Probably. There were 4 members. Likely. And someone is systematically eliminating them. Holmes nodded. That is my present view. But why? That remains the central question. The following afternoon brought an unexpected development. We had scarcely finished luncheon when a telegram arrived. Holmes opened it. Read it. Then immediately stood. What is it? Lestrade. Has something happened? He has found the office. The office? The one mentioned by Finch. I rose instantly. Then we have a lead. We have something better. What? Holmes handed me the telegram. It read, Discovered property leased under Blackthorne's name. Abandoned office. Come immediately. The office occupied the upper floor of an aging commercial building near Holborn. Its windows were covered with dust. No business sign hung outside. The premises appeared deserted. Lestrade awaited us at the entrance. You were quick. I dislike suspense. The inspector led us upstairs. The rooms beyond were surprisingly large. Several desks occupied the main chamber. A fireplace stood against one wall. Everything appeared abandoned, yet not neglected. Indeed, the dust seemed oddly uneven. Holmes noticed it immediately. So, Lestrade folded his arms. So? Someone has been here recently. The inspector sighed. Of course they have. Holmes pointed. A clean patch upon one desk, another beside a cabinet. Footprints near the fireplace. Subtle signs, yet unmistakable. Anything recovered? Holmes asked. Very little. Lestrade produced a small object. A brass key. Found beneath a floorboard. Holmes accepted it. His eyes brightened. Interesting. What is? It is not an office key. How can you know? The design. He examined it carefully. A private strongbox. Lestrade groaned. Naturally. We spent nearly an hour searching the premises. For a time it seemed the effort would produce nothing. Then Holmes stopped beside a bookcase. A faint smile touched his lips. Watson. Yes? Would you assist me? Together we moved the heavy furniture. Behind it appeared a narrow section of wall. At first glance it seemed ordinary. Then I noticed the outline. A concealed door. Lestrade's eyes widened. Good heavens! Holmes inserted the brass key. The lock clicked. The hidden panel swung inward. Beyond lay a small chamber scarcely larger than a closet. Empty shelves lined the walls. Dust covered the floor. Yet one object remained. A single sheet of paper. Holmes picked it up carefully. Upon it appeared 4 names. The first 3 had been crossed out. Julian Blackthorne, Nathaniel Crowe, Edward Marlowe. Each bore a heavy line through it. Beneath them appeared a 4th name, one not yet crossed out. The name Arthur Finch had struggled to remember. The final member of the circle, the last surviving man on the list, Sir Reginald Vale. A profound silence filled the hidden chamber. At last Lestrade spoke. Then Crowe is not the final target. No, the killer still has unfinished business. Yes. I stared at the remaining name. Who is Sir Reginald Vale? Holmes's expression grew grave. A question, Watson, that may determine whether we prevent a fourth murder or arrive just in time to investigate it. He folded the paper carefully and slipped it into his pocket. For the first time since the mystery began, we possessed a complete list of the intended victims. Unfortunately, somewhere in London, the killer almost certainly possessed the same list, and only one name remained uncrossed. Chapter 6. The Last Man on the List. There are moments in every investigation when scattered fragments suddenly begin to form a recognizable pattern. The discovery of the hidden chamber and its ominous list represented such a moment. For days we had pursued disconnected clues, a dead solicitor, cryptic warnings, a missing ledger, an unidentified corpse, and a mysterious organization known only as the Circle. Now, for the first time, a clear structure emerged. 4 men, 4 names, 3 already struck from the list, 1 remaining. The challenge confronting us was no longer merely to identify the killer, it was to reach the final target before the killer did. We left the abandoned office shortly after sunset. The evening had turned unusually cold. A sharp wind swept through the streets, scattering leaves along the pavement. Holmes remained silent throughout the cab ride. His fingers rested lightly against his chin. I recognized the signs. His mind was working furiously. At last he spoke. "Watson." "Yes?" "What do Blackthorne, Crowe, Marlowe and Vale have in common?" I considered. Membership in the Circle. "Naturally. What else?" "I do not know. Nor do I." The admission surprised me. Holmes smiled faintly. "It is important to acknowledge ignorance when one encounters it. That is not a principle I often hear from Scotland Yard, which explains much." I laughed. Then my thoughts returned to the matter at hand. Who is Edward Marlowe? The unidentified body. You've identified him? Almost certainly. Holmes removed a notebook. The age corresponds. The timeline fits. And shipping records connect Marlowe to Nathaniel Crowe. I stared. When did you discover that? Yesterday. You neglected to mention it. You neglected to ask. Such exchanges were typical of Holmes, infuriating, and occasionally amusing. By 8 o'clock that evening, we arrived at the residence of Sir Reginald Vale. The property occupied a distinguished position in Belgravia. Unlike the modest elegance of Blackthorne's home, Vale's residence proclaimed wealth without apology. A broad stone staircase led to imposing double doors. Tall windows overlooked a carefully maintained square. The entire structure radiated privilege. A liveried servant admitted us. We were shown into a magnificent library lined with books from floor to ceiling. A fire burned warmly in the hearth. Moments later the owner entered. Sir Reginald Vale was a striking figure. Tall, silver-haired, perhaps 60 years of age. His posture remained remarkably upright. Sharp blue eyes regarded us with unmistakable intelligence. He greeted Holmes calmly. "Mr. Sherlock Holmes, you know me. I read newspapers." His gaze shifted toward me. "And Dr. Watson." I bowed slightly. Sir Reginald motioned toward several chairs. "What brings you here?" Holmes wasted no time. "Your life may be in danger." Most men would have reacted with surprise. Sir Reginald merely sighed. I feared as much. The response stunned me. Holmes's eyes narrowed. "You expected this warning." "Eventually." "Interesting." The older man moved toward the fireplace. "Then Blackthorne is truly dead." "You had doubts?" "I hoped the reports were false." "And Edward Marlowe?" A flicker crossed his face. "Dead as well?" "Yes." Sir Reginald closed his eyes briefly. The gesture carried genuine sadness. "Nathaniel Crowe?" "Alive. For the moment." The room fell silent. Then Sir Reginald spoke the words we had been waiting to hear. "We were the Circle." The confession transformed the atmosphere instantly. Holmes leaned forward. At last we stood before a man who could answer our questions. "What was the Circle?" Holmes asked. Sir Reginald stared into the fire. For 20 years, it was a partnership. A business partnership? In a sense. Explain. The old man hesitated. I would prefer not to. Holmes's voice hardened slightly. 3 men are dead. Yes. A 4th may soon follow. Quite. Your preferences are becoming irrelevant. A faint smile appeared. You always were direct. Holmes blinked. You know me personally? No. Then, I know your reputation. The smile vanished. Sir Reginald poured himself a drink. His hand trembled slightly. The first visible sign of strain. The circle began 20 years ago. Go on. There were 4 of us. Blackthorne, Crowe, Marlowe, and yourself. Correct. What united you? A secret. Holmes waited. So, I gathered. Sir Reginald took a slow breath. We acquired something. What? I cannot tell you. Cannot, or will not. The old man met Holmes's gaze. Both. The exchange lasted several seconds. Finally, Holmes nodded. Very well. His willingness to move on surprised me, yet I knew him well enough to recognize that he had merely changed tactics. Did someone threaten the circle recently? He asked. Yes. A specific individual? No. You never learned the identity. Sir Reginald shook his head. Only the warnings. The messages? Yes. When did they begin? 2 months ago. And the 20th. The old man stiffened. Immediately. The reaction was impossible to miss. There. Holmes pointed. You know exactly what the 20th signifies. For the first time, uncertainty entered Sir Reginald's expression. It was a deadline. A deadline for what? No answer. Holmes sighed. You continue to conceal information. I am trying to protect others. By allowing a murderer freedom, the word struck home. Sir Reginald lowered his eyes, yet still he refused. I cannot. We departed shortly before midnight. As we crossed the square, I finally voiced my frustration. That accomplished very little. Did it? Holmes seemed amused. He told us almost nothing. He told us a great deal. What? His fears. I stared. That is not evidence. No. But it is information. Holmes stopped beneath a street lamp. The circle acquired something. Yes. They have concealed it for 20 years. Apparently. Now someone wants it returned. The theory seemed plausible, yet questions remained. If so, why murder them? Because one of them possesses the object. Which one? Excellent question. We resumed walking. The wind had grown stronger. Clouds raced across the moon. At length Holmes spoke again. There is another possibility. What? The object may no longer exist. Destroyed, lost. Then why continue killing? Holmes's expression darkened. Revenge. The single word lingered unpleasantly. The following morning brought a development so unexpected that it altered the course of the investigation entirely. We were finishing breakfast when a messenger arrived from Sir Reginald Vale. The man carried a sealed envelope. Inside was a brief note. Holmes read it once, then immediately rose. What is it? He handed me the letter. The message consisted of only 3 lines. Mr. Holmes, I have changed my mind. Come at once. Signed, Reginald Vale. I looked up. Perhaps he's ready to talk. Perhaps. Yet something in Holmes's tone troubled me. What's wrong? The handwriting. I examined the signature. It appeared perfectly normal. I see nothing unusual. Exactly. What do you mean? Holmes grabbed his coat. Because, Watson, the note is genuine. Surely that's a good thing. No. His eyes had become suddenly urgent. If Sir Reginald truly decided to speak, then someone has frightened him into doing so. A chill ran through me. Within moments we were racing toward Belgravia. The journey seemed endless. At last our cab reached the square. Even before it stopped, I sensed something was wrong. Several people stood gathered outside Vale's residence. A police constable blocked the entrance. And parked before the house stood an ambulance carriage. Holmes was moving before the cab fully halted. We hurried toward the crowd. Lestrade emerged from the doorway. His expression alone told the story. "We're too late." My heart sank. "No." "Yes." "Sir Reginald?" The inspector nodded grimly. "Found dead in his library less than an hour ago." For a moment nobody spoke. The wind whispered through the square. 3 names had already been crossed from the list. Now the 4th appeared to have joined them. Yet as I looked at Holmes, I noticed something curious. He did not appear defeated. He appeared angry. Very angry. And whenever Sherlock Holmes became angry, it usually meant he had noticed something everyone else had overlooked. As we entered the house and approached the scene of the crime, I could not escape the feeling that the mystery of the circle was approaching a decisive turning point. For if the last surviving member was now dead, then someone had just silenced the final witness, or so the killer believed. Chapter 7. The Death of Sir Reginald Vale. I have often observed that Sherlock Holmes displayed his greatest brilliance when confronted by apparent impossibilities. Ordinary crimes interested him only moderately. Straightforward motives, obvious suspects, and uncomplicated evidence rarely held his attention for long. Yet place before him a locked room, a contradiction, or a fact that seemed to violate common sense, and every faculty of his remarkable mind immediately awakened. The death of Sir Reginald Vale belonged firmly within that category. By every appearance, the old gentleman had died alone. By every appearance, no murderer had entered the room. And by every appearance, the killer had nevertheless succeeded. The library presented a scene of extraordinary calm. Had it not been for the presence of police officers and a physician, one might have imagined its owner merely asleep. Sir Reginald sat in a high-backed leather chair near the fireplace. His eyes were closed. One hand rested upon the armrest. The other hung loosely at his side. A half-finished glass of brandy stood upon a nearby table. No signs of struggle were visible. No furniture had been disturbed. No obvious weapon appeared. The room itself remained immaculate. Inspector Lestrade met us at the entrance. "Well?" Holmes asked. The inspector shrugged. "Heart failure, perhaps." Holmes raised an eyebrow. "Perhaps. The physician isn't certain." I approached the body. After a brief examination, I understood the uncertainty. Sir Reginald's face displayed a curious expression. Not pain, not surprise, something closer to alarm, as though he had recognized danger moments before death. "What do you think, Watson?" Holmes asked. I considered carefully. "Not heart failure. No, there are inconsistencies, such as the discoloration." I pointed toward the skin, the pupils, the tension in the jaw. Holmes nodded. "Excellent." Lestrade sighed. "English, if you please." I stood. "I suspect poisoning." The inspector blinked. "Poison?" "Quite possibly." Holmes smiled. "My thoughts precisely." The library was sealed immediately. Holmes began a meticulous examination. He approached the room exactly as he had approached Gaslight Bridge, Blackthorn's study, and the abandoned office. Methodically, patiently, without assumptions. The windows were locked, the doors secured. No hidden entrances existed. No footprints appeared outside. No signs of forced entry. Everything suggested that Sir Reginald had admitted no visitor, yet someone had almost certainly murdered him. For over an hour, Holmes searched in silence. At length he stopped beside the writing desk. "Aha," Lestrade groaned. "You found something." "Several things." "What?" Holmes lifted a sheet of paper. The unfinished letter. I joined him. A single page lay upon the desk. Only a few lines had been written. The handwriting was unmistakably Sir Reginald's. "Mr. Holmes, I should have spoken sooner. The matter concerns the events of May 1874, and the object recovered from—" The sentence ended abruptly. Nothing followed. The pen stroke simply stopped, as though the writer had been interrupted, or had died. "This was found where?" Holmes asked. "Exactly there," said Lestrade. "No sign it was moved?" "None." Holmes examined the ink, then the pen, then the blotter. Finally he nodded. Interesting. What now? Asked Lestrade. The letter confirms several things, such as, first, Sir Reginald intended to reveal the truth. Naturally. Second, the truth involves an event in May of 1874. Perhaps. No, perhaps. Holmes tapped the paper. The man was writing a confession. The inspector folded his arms. And the object? That is the more important question. Several minutes later, Holmes moved toward the drinks cabinet. A number of decanters stood arranged neatly upon a polished tray. Brandy, whiskey, port, sherry. Sir Reginald's glass still rested beside his chair. Holmes lifted it carefully, smelled it, then handed it to me. I examined the contents. The aroma seemed normal. Brandy? Yes. Nothing unusual. No? Holmes pointed. I looked again. At first I saw nothing. Then I noticed a faint residue clinging to the interior surface. A thin crystalline deposit, barely visible. My medical instincts immediately stirred. Good heavens, precisely. You believe poison was dissolved in the drink, not dissolved. What then? Added. Lestrade frowned. What's the difference? Holmes smiled faintly. The difference is vital. He pointed toward the decanter. Observe. The brandy within remained clear, untouched. No residue, no contamination. Only the glass contained traces, which meant the poison had entered the drink after it had been poured. The implication was disturbing. Someone had tampered with the glass itself. The discovery should have simplified matters. Instead, it deepened the mystery. For according to every servant in the household, Sir Reginald had spent the evening entirely alone. No visitors, no disturbances, no strangers, nothing unusual whatsoever. At 3 o'clock he had retired to the library. At 6 o'clock he was found dead. The interval remained unexplained. Holmes interviewed each servant personally. The butler, the cook, the footman, the maid, all told identical stories. No visitors, no suspicious activity, nothing. When the final interview concluded, Holmes seemed dissatisfied, very dissatisfied. We stood together in the hallway. Something troubles you. Several things. What specifically? The servants. I blinked. You think they're lying? No. Then? They are telling the truth. I stared. That troubles you? Immensely. He began pacing. If no visitor entered, then? The poison was already inside the house. Of course, which narrows our possibilities considerably. I followed his reasoning. One of the servants, a member of the household, yet something felt wrong. The servants appeared genuinely distressed. Moreover, murder seemed an unlikely motive. Could they be involved? I asked. Possibly. You don't believe it? No. Why? Holmes stopped. Because professional killers rarely depend upon domestic staff. It was nearing dusk when the breakthrough arrived. The moment remains vivid in my memory. We had returned to the library. Lestrade sat reviewing notes. I was re-examining the unfinished letter. Holmes wandered aimlessly around the room, or appeared to. Suddenly he froze, his gaze fixed upon the fireplace. For several seconds he did not move. Then, with startling speed, he crossed the room. "What is it?" I asked. No answer. He knelt beside the hearth, examined the ashes, then reached inside. A moment later he withdrew a small object, a burnt fragment of paper, hardly larger than a postage stamp. Yet Holmes regarded it as though it were a jewel. "What have you found?" Without speaking, he handed it to me. Most of the writing had been destroyed. Only a few words remained legible, recovered beneath. Bridge. My pulse quickened instantly. Bridge. The word again. Always the bridge. Gaslight Bridge. The fragment appeared to belong to an older document, perhaps decades old, perhaps older than the circle itself. Holmes rose slowly. His expression had changed. I recognized it immediately. The look signified not certainty, but proximity. The sensation of a hunter catching his first clear scent. Watson, yes? Do you recall Sir Reginald's unfinished letter? The object recovered in 1874. Exactly. His eyes gleamed. And now we have a document referring to something recovered beneath a bridge. A startling possibility formed in my mind. The object came from the river, perhaps, or beneath the bridge, perhaps. Gaslight Bridge? Holmes shook his head. No, why not? Gaslight Bridge was not constructed until 1881. I stared. The simple historical fact instantly destroyed my theory. Holmes smiled faintly. Never allow chronology to become an afterthought, Watson. Night had fallen before we finally departed. The city shimmered beneath countless lamps. For much of the journey back to Baker Street, neither of us spoke. Then Holmes suddenly broke the silence. Something occurred to me. What? The stranger. Mercer's stranger? Yes. The dead man on the bridge. Holmes nodded. The phrase. Then I am too late. Exactly. What about it? Holmes looked out into the darkness. I believe we have misunderstood it. A chill crept through me. How so? Suppose the man wasn't lamenting a missed appointment. Then what? Holmes's eyes narrowed. Suppose he had just learned that the 20th had already passed. I frowned. Yes? Then perhaps he wasn't too late for a meeting. A long silence followed. The wheels of the cab rattled over cobblestones. Finally I spoke. For what was he too late? Holmes turned toward me. His expression was grave. Dying. The word hung between us. Before I could question him further, the cab reached Baker Street. Yet, as we climbed the familiar steps to our lodgings, I knew something significant had shifted. The clues were beginning to converge. The bridge, the object, the circle, the warnings, the mysterious 20th. Somewhere among them lay the truth, and Sherlock Holmes was drawing steadily closer to it. Closer, perhaps, than the killer realized. For late that night, after I had retired to my room, I heard Holmes suddenly exclaim from the sitting room below, not loudly, not triumphantly, but with the quiet excitement of a man who has finally glimpsed the outline of an answer. The game, I felt certain, was entering its most dangerous stage, and before it concluded, more than one secret buried for 20 years would rise from the shadows of Victorian London. Chapter 8. The Secret Beneath the River. The events of the following day marked the turning point of the entire investigation. Until then, we had possessed clues. Afterward, we possessed a direction. The distinction may appear slight, yet it is of immense importance in detective work. Clues without context resemble stars scattered across the night sky. Only when joined together do they reveal a recognizable pattern. When I descended to breakfast the next morning, I discovered Holmes already dressed for travel. Several maps covered the sitting room table. Reference books lay open. Newspaper archives were stacked beside his chair. Most telling of all, his violin remained untouched. Whenever Holmes neglected music, it signified that his mind had become wholly absorbed by a problem. "Good morning," said I. "Is it? You seem pleased." "I am interested." In Holmesian language, that usually means pleased. A faint smile appeared. "You grow perceptive, Watson." "I try." He pointed toward a chair. "Sit." I obeyed. "What have you discovered?" Holmes tapped one of the maps. "A date." "The 20th?" "No. May 1874. "Precisely." He slid a newspaper clipping across the table. "I spent part of the night examining archives." I adjusted my spectacles. The clipping appeared yellow with age. The headline read, "Shipping Disaster, on the Thames." Beneath it lay a detailed account of an accident occurring in May of 1874. A merchant vessel had collided with another ship during heavy fog. Several sailors died. Cargo was lost. The wreck sank in a narrow branch of the river. I looked up. Interesting. Continue reading. Further down the article appeared a sentence that immediately caught my attention. Recovery operations suspended due to dangerous underwater conditions. My pulse quickened. Recovered. Exactly. The word from the burned document. Holmes nodded. What was recovered? That, said Holmes, is the question. An hour later, we were travelling eastward. Our destination lay several miles beyond Gaslight Bridge. The branch of the Thames mentioned in the article still existed, though the surrounding district had changed considerably over the years. Warehouses crowded the shoreline. Factories occupied ground that had once been open riverbank. The London of 1894 differed greatly from the London of 1874, yet enough remained to guide our search. The morning proved unusually clear. For the first time in days, sunlight reflected from the water. Holmes appeared invigorated by the change. There, he pointed toward a weathered dock. What is it? The approximate location of the wreck. We descended from our carriage. Several fishermen worked nearby. A few dock labourers loaded cargo. Otherwise, the area remained quiet. Holmes immediately began making inquiries. Within half an hour, he had located an elderly riverman named Samuel Briggs. The man claimed to have participated in recovery operations following the disaster 20 years earlier. He possessed a weather-beaten face and a remarkable memory. After suitable encouragement in the form of several shillings, he proved willing to talk. "Aye," he said, scratching his beard. "I remember it." "The wreck?" Holmes asked, clear as yesterday. "What happened?" Briggs spat thoughtfully into the river. "Fog. A collision? That's right. Were valuables aboard?" The old riverman laughed. "Every ship carried valuables." "No," said Holmes. "I mean something unusual." Briggs became thoughtful. Then, slowly, his expression changed. There was talk. What sort of talk? Something found underwater. Holmes remained perfectly still. I knew that pose. He was concentrating intensely. What was found? The riverman shrugged. No one knew, yet rumours existed. Oh, certainly. What kind? Briggs lowered his voice. Government property. My heart quickened. Government property. Aye. Recovered from the wreck. So they said. Holmes exchanged a quick glance with me. The pieces were beginning to move. Who recovered it? He asked. Briggs thought carefully. A group of gentlemen. Names? No. How many? The old man frowned. 4, I think. Neither Holmes nor I spoke. 4. Again 4. The circle. We spent the remainder of the morning pursuing every available lead. Most proved worthless. A few yielded fragments. By early afternoon, Holmes had assembled a rough outline of events. In May of 1874, a vessel sank. During subsequent recovery operations, 4 civilians somehow obtained possession of an unidentified object. Those 4 men later became the Circle. For 20 years they concealed whatever they had found. Now someone was killing them. The theory possessed elegance. Unfortunately, it lacked proof. And proof remained Holmes's obsession. "We are missing something," he muttered. "What?" "The motive. Revenge. Possibly. The object itself. Perhaps." He shook his head. "No. Then what?" "The killer's certainty." I frowned. "What do you mean?" Holmes stopped walking. "The murderer knows exactly whom to target." "Naturally." "No, Watson." His eyes narrowed. "Consider carefully." I did, and suddenly understood. The circle had been secret, its existence known to very few, yet the killer possessed a complete list of members, which meant he has access to information. Excellent. Records. Perhaps. The ledger. Holmes smiled. Now we advance. Late that afternoon we received unexpected assistance. Upon returning to Baker Street, we found Inspector Lestrade waiting impatiently. "I've been here an hour." "A tragedy for everyone involved," said Holmes. The inspector ignored him. "I've identified something." "What?" "The ring." Holmes became attentive immediately. "What ring?" "The one missing from Marlowe's finger." I recalled the pale mark upon the dead man's hand. "Go on." Lestrade produced a photograph. The image showed a signet ring. Heavy gold. Distinctive engraving, a circular emblem. My eyes widened. The design consisted of 4 interlocking lines forming a closed pattern, almost a wheel, or a circle. Holmes took the photograph. The circle. Lestrade nodded. So it would seem. Where did you find this? Pawnbroker. When? Yesterday. A silence followed. Holmes examined the image carefully. Then his expression changed. Not dramatically, yet enough for me to notice. What is it? I asked. He handed me the photograph. At first glance I saw nothing unusual. Then I noticed a tiny detail, a date engraved beneath the symbol, May 1874. I looked up sharply. Good heavens! Precisely, said Holmes. The ring represented far more than jewellery. It was a badge, a marker, proof. The circle had indeed been formed following the recovery operation. The connection was no longer speculative. It was established. That evening, Holmes locked himself inside our rooms. For hours he refused interruptions. Maps, documents, newspaper reports, letters, photographs. Everything disappeared behind the closed door of his mental workshop. Near midnight he finally emerged. His eyes were bright, very bright. I recognized the look immediately. A major deduction had occurred. You've solved it. No, but... I understand part of it. Which part? The bridge. I sat upright. The stranger. The appearance. The disappearance. Both. He lit his pipe. The event itself was genuine. You believe Mercer? Completely. My astonishment must have been evident. Then he truly saw Blackthorne? No. Yet the event was genuine. Entirely. I shook my head. That makes no sense. It will. Holmes inhaled thoughtfully. The bridge was a message. A message? Yes. From whom? The killer. My pulse quickened. To whom? Crow. The answer stunned me. Holmes continued. Think of the timing. The 20th. Exactly. The watch. The warnings. The supposed dead man. Suddenly I saw the outline. Not clearly, but enough to glimpse the possibility. The killer wanted someone to see it. Excellent. Mercer was chosen accidentally? Perhaps. Or deliberately. Holmes smiled. Now you begin asking useful questions. I leaned forward. What happened on that bridge? For several moments he remained silent. Then he spoke quietly. The killer staged a resurrection. A chill travelled down my spine. A resurrection? Of sorts. The dead solicitor. Yes. The appearance after death. Exactly. But why? Holmes stared into the fire. His expression grew unusually grave. Because the murderer was trying to tell the surviving members of the circle something. What? His answer came softly. That the dead were returning. I slept poorly that night. The implications of Holmes's theory were deeply unsettling. If correct, the bridge apparition was not random. It was part of a larger design, a calculated act of psychological warfare. Someone wished to terrify the remaining members of the circle before killing them. Yet one question persisted. Why? What secret could inspire such elaborate vengeance after 20 years? The answer arrived sooner than either of us expected. For at precisely 7 o'clock the next morning, a telegram arrived from Nathaniel Crowe. Its contents were brief, alarmingly brief. Holmes, the ledger has been found. Come immediately. The message changed everything. For somewhere within that missing ledger lay the truth behind the circle. And if Holmes's suspicions were correct, the killer would stop at nothing to recover it first. Chapter 9. The Ledger of 4 Men. The telegram from Nathaniel Crowe altered the entire rhythm of the investigation. Until that moment, we had been pursuing fragments of history, echoes of an event buried in the past. Now, suddenly, that past had begun to speak again in the present tense. Holmes read the message twice without comment. Then he folded it carefully and placed it on the table. Watson. Yes? We are approaching the centre of the matter. You believe the ledger contains the truth. I believe it contains a truth. Not the whole truth. Holmes shook his head. If experience teaches anything, it is that no single document ever contains the entire truth. I found this remark characteristic of him: skeptical, measured, and invariably correct. We arrived at Crow's residence shortly after 9. Unlike Sir Reginald Vale's grandeur or Blackthorn's restraint, Crow's house reflected practicality. A merchant's home, comfortable, unpretentious, efficient. The servant who admitted us appeared visibly shaken. "Mr. Crow is in the study," he said. "He has not slept." Holmes exchanged a glance with me. That statement alone was troubling. We were led through a narrow corridor into a modest but well-organized study. Nathaniel Crow stood beside his desk. He looked older than when we had last seen him. Fatigue had carved deep lines into his face. His hands trembled slightly as he gestured toward a small iron box resting open on the table. "It's here," he said. Holmes approached immediately. "Open?" "Yes." "You should not have done that alone." Crow gave a hollow laugh. "I had little choice." Inside the box lay a thick, leather-bound ledger. Unlike the crimson fragment we had previously recovered, this volume was intact. Its cover bore the same circular emblem we had seen on the ring. 4 interlocking lines, a sealed pattern, the circle's mark. Holmes opened the ledger carefully. For several moments he said nothing. Then he began to read. His expression changed almost immediately, subtle at first, then increasingly focused. Finally, something close to recognition appeared in his eyes. "What is it?" I asked. Holmes did not answer. Instead, he turned a page, then another. Crow shifted nervously. "You understand it?" Holmes finally spoke. "Yes." A single word, heavy with consequence. "Then explain," said Crow. Holmes closed the ledger. "Not yet." The merchant looked frustrated. "Why not?" "Because someone else is already on their way here." The room froze. I felt the air tighten. Crow stepped back slightly. "What do you mean?" Holmes moved toward the window. Outside, the street appeared calm, yet something in his posture suggested danger. "How did you obtain this ledger?" Holmes asked. Crow hesitated. "From storage." "Whose storage?" "My firm's archives." "And how did it survive 20 years unnoticed?" "It was mislabeled." Holmes turned sharply. "Mislabeled?" "Yes." "What label did it carry?" Crow swallowed. "Shipping accounts." A silence followed. Holmes closed his eyes briefly, then reopened them. "Of course." I frowned. "What is it?" Holmes turned to me. "The entire affair has been hidden in plain sight." Before he could elaborate, a loud crash echoed from the lower floor. Crow recoiled. "What was that?" Holmes was already moving. "Stay here." I followed him without hesitation. We descended the staircase quickly. Another sound followed. A door forced open. Footsteps, rapid, controlled, not chaotic, intentional. Holmes reached the bottom landing first. He stopped, raised a hand. I halted behind him. The hallway below was empty, or appeared to be. Then Holmes pointed. A shadow moved near the study door. The intruder was already inside. Crow's voice called from above. "What's happening?" Holmes did not answer. He stepped forward, slowly, carefully. We entered the study. The ledger remained on the desk, but Crow was gone. A chair lay overturned. The window stood open. A cold draught swept through the room. Holmes moved instantly to the window, looked out, then cursed softly, a rare occurrence. "What is it?" I asked. He pointed downward. Crow lay on the pavement below, unmoving. We rushed outside immediately. Fortunately, the fall had not killed him. He was breathing, but unconscious. A nearby constable was summoned. An ambulance carriage was dispatched. Holmes remained kneeling beside the body for several seconds. Then he stood. "Deliberate," he said quietly. "What?" "The fall was not accidental. You believe he was pushed?" "No." "Then what?" Holmes looked toward the open window. "He was forced." I frowned. "By whom?" Holmes did not answer immediately. Instead, he examined the ground. A set of footprints appeared faintly in the damp soil beneath the window. He studied them carefully, then spoke. 2 intruders. How can you tell? Different tread patterns. Lestrade, who had arrived moments earlier, groaned. Of course there are 2. Holmes ignored him. One set of prints led away from the house. The other circled briefly near the wall. One entered, Holmes said. The other waited. For what? Holmes straightened. For Crow to fall. A heavy silence followed. The implication was disturbing. This was not random violence. It was coordinated, methodical, professional. We returned to the study. The ledger still lay open on the desk. Holmes resumed reading where he had left off. This time his pace slowed, deliberate, absorbing. Then suddenly he stopped. His finger rested upon a line. What is it? I asked. He did not answer immediately. Instead, he read the passage again, then again. Finally, he spoke. Watson. Yes? Do you recall the shipping disaster of 1874? Yes. The recovered object? Yes. His voice lowered. It was not an object. I frowned. What then? Holmes looked up. It was a list. The words struck me like a blow. A list of names. Lestrade stepped forward sharply. What sort of names? Holmes closed the ledger. The names of men involved in a government recovery operation. A pause. Then he added quietly, and the ledger records what each man received in exchange for silence. A cold silence filled the room. At last Lestrade spoke. You mean bribery? Holmes shook his head. Not bribery. Worse? Blackmail? Holmes nodded slowly. Yes. The implications settled heavily. 4 men, a secret recovered from a wreck, and a ledger recording their compromise. Lestrade looked troubled. Then the circle wasn't a business partnership. No, Holmes's expression darkened. It was an agreement under coercion. I felt a chill. And someone is now killing them because of it. Holmes did not answer immediately. Instead, he looked at the ledger again, then spoke softly. Not because of what they did. Then why? He closed the book. Because of what they hid. That evening, Holmes remained unusually quiet. The ledger had provided answers, but not resolution. If anything, it had deepened the mystery. As darkness settled over London, Holmes stood by the window, motionless. At length I broke the silence. What now? Holmes did not turn. Now we wait. For what? For the final move. I frowned. Whose? His reply came after a pause. The murderer's. Outside, the fog had begun to return, and somewhere within it, unseen and patient, the final stage of the game was already being prepared. Chapter 10. Gaslight Bridge Revisited. There are cases in which pursuit and understanding proceed in parallel, and there are cases in which understanding lags hopelessly behind pursuit, forcing the investigator to act upon partial knowledge. This, as Holmes later remarked, was an example of the latter. We left Baker Street before dawn. The fog had returned with an almost deliberate persistence, as though London itself refused to release the secrets it had been concealing. Holmes sat motionless in the cab. The ledger rested in his coat pocket. He had not opened it again since leaving Crow's residence. You intend to return to the bridge? I asked. Yes. Why? Because everything converges there. I considered this. Blackthorn was seen there. Yes. The stranger vanished there. Yes. The name Gaslight Bridge appears in the ledger fragments. Yes. And now? Holmes turned toward me. Now we go there before someone else does. Gaslight Bridge emerged from the mist like a half-remembered thought. Its iron frame loomed above the Thames, dark and skeletal beneath the weak morning light. The gas lamps had not yet been lit. The river below moved sluggishly, reflecting the sky in dull fragments of grey. We stepped onto the bridge. Immediately I felt a change in atmosphere, not physical, psychological, a sense of expectation, as though the structure itself awaited a conclusion. Holmes moved slowly along the span, observing, measuring, reconstructing. Watson. Yes. Stand here. I obeyed. Where Mercer stood. Yes. Holmes walked several paces away, then stopped. Now imagine, he said, a man standing there at midnight. I attempted to visualize it. Fog. Gaslight. A solitary figure. Holmes continued. A second man approaches. Blackthorn? Perhaps. And then? Holmes gestured toward the railing. Something occurs. What? I am not yet certain. His frustration was unusual. Holmes rarely admitted uncertainty so openly. He knelt near the eastern railing, examined the ironwork, then suddenly paused. What is it? I asked. He did not respond immediately. Instead, he traced something with his fingertips. A faint indentation, almost invisible. Watson. Yes? Look closely. I bent down. At first I saw nothing. Then gradually it became clear. A subtle groove in the metal, not caused by weathering, not natural corrosion. Mechanical. Deliberate. Something was attached here, I said. Correct. What? Holmes stood. A fixture. A device. Possibly. Lestrade, who had followed us reluctantly, frowned. A device on a bridge. Holmes nodded. Something removable. Why? To control visibility. I stared. Control visibility. Holmes looked toward the river. Fog behaves predictably along water. Yes. But light behaves differently. I did not follow. He continued. Gas lamps placed at intervals create blind zones. Between them, precisely, he pointed. At certain angles, a person can appear and disappear rapidly. I felt a chill. You think the bridge was used for staging illusions? Holmes's eyes narrowed. Not illusions. Then what? Controlled appearances. We were interrupted by Lestrade. I found something. He held up a small object retrieved from beneath a loose plank. A brass fitting, cylindrical, with a fractured hinge. Holmes took it immediately. His expression sharpened. This confirms it. Confirms what? I asked. Holmes turned the object slowly in his hand. A mechanism was installed here. For what purpose? Before he could answer, a voice came from behind us. To simulate death. We turned sharply. A man stood at the far end of the bridge. Tall, dark coat, hat drawn low. His presence was unnervingly calm. Holmes did not move. You are early, he said. The man stepped forward. I have been early for 20 years. Lestrade reached for his weapon. Stay where you are. The man ignored him. His eyes were fixed on Holmes. You understand now, he said. Holmes studied him. Sir Reginald Vale. The man smiled faintly. Not any more. A silence followed. The fog thickened around us. The river below seemed suddenly distant. Holmes spoke quietly. You were not murdered. No. You staged your death. Yes. Why? The man, Vale, took a slow step forward. Because we made a mistake in 1874. The words landed heavily. Holmes did not interrupt. Vale continued. We believed we had concealed the object. The ledger? No. Then what? Vale's expression hardened. The truth about what we recovered. A pause. Then he added, and what it does. Holmes' voice remained steady. What does it do? Vale shook his head. You would not believe me. Try me. For the first time, uncertainty flickered across the man's face. Then he spoke. It reveals guilt. A long silence followed. Lestrade scoffed. What nonsense is this? Holmes did not respond. His eyes remained fixed on Vale. Continue, he said quietly. Vale gestured toward the river. Each of us who handled it paid a price. Blackthorn, dead. Crow, broken. Marlowe, destroyed. He looked at Holmes. And the list continues. Holmes' expression darkened. Finch? Vale nodded. He will not survive. Lestrade stepped forward. This is superstition. Vale laughed softly. It was once superstition. And now Now it is evidence. Holmes finally spoke. Show me. Vale hesitated, then slowly reached inside his coat. He produced a small object wrapped in cloth. Before he could open it, Holmes moved. Fast. Precise. In one motion he seized Vale's wrist. But Vale did not resist. Instead he smiled. You are too late. At that exact moment, a sound echoed across the bridge. A distant mechanical click. Holmes froze, then turned sharply toward the eastern railing. The brass fitting Lestrade had found earlier began to vibrate. The river fog shifted, and for a brief, impossible moment, a shape appeared on the bridge. A man, standing exactly where Mercer had described. Holmes's eyes widened, because the figure looked unmistakably like Julian Blackthorne, dead, yet standing, breathing, watching us, and smiling. Lestrade staggered back. This is impossible. Holmes did not move. His voice was barely audible. No, he said. It is staged. But even as he spoke, the figure stepped backward into the fog and vanished without a sound. No splash, no struggle, no trace. Only silence remained. Vale exhaled slowly. You see, he said. Holmes released his grip. For the first time since I had known him, I saw genuine unease in his expression, because the illusion, however it had been produced, had worked perfectly. And somewhere within that deception lay the final secret of the circle, a secret that had just revealed itself in the most unsettling way possible. On Gaslight Bridge, the dead had walked again, and Sherlock Holmes, for the first time in his career, had witnessed something that refused to behave like a crime at all. Chapter 11. The Man Who Should Not Be Alive. There are moments in human experience which resist immediate interpretation. They settle instead into the mind like a splinter, small, sharp, and impossible to ignore, forcing repeated reconsideration until meaning is finally extracted through persistence. The apparition upon Gaslight Bridge was such a moment. By the time we returned to Baker Street, none of us spoke. Lestrade paced the room in visible agitation. I remained seated, attempting to reconcile reason with what I had seen. Holmes stood by the fireplace, motionless, thinking. At length Lestrade broke the silence. I saw a dead man. You saw an illusion, Holmes corrected. An illusion that walked and smiled. Holmes did not reply immediately. That hesitation alone disturbed me more than Lestrade's words. Finally Holmes spoke. It was a projection of some kind. From where? I asked. That is the correct question. He turned toward me. And one we will answer. The ledger lay open on the table once more. Holmes had returned to it immediately upon our arrival. This time, however, he did not read passively. He searched, comparing entries, cross-referencing names, mapping connections invisible to ordinary scrutiny. Lestrade eventually grew impatient. This is pointless. We should be pursuing Vale. Holmes did not look up. We are pursuing Vale. He vanished on that bridge. No. Holmes tapped the ledger. He allowed himself to be seen. I frowned. Why? Holmes closed the book. Because he wants us to understand something. And what is that? Holmes looked up slowly. That death is not what we assumed. His answer made no immediate sense. Yet Holmes rarely spoke without foundation. He then requested access to Finch. We returned to the hospital. The clerk had worsened overnight. His wounds were not fatal, yet his condition suggested severe shock. When we entered, his eyes immediately filled with fear. It happened, he whispered. Holmes sat beside him. What happened? The bridge. Holmes nodded. Yes. Finch gripped the bedsheet tightly. I saw him again. Holmes leaned forward. Blackthorne. The man nodded violently. But he is dead. I know. Then what did you see? Finch struggled to speak. It wasn't him. Holmes' eyes narrowed. Explain. Finch swallowed. It was wrong. Wrong how? He moved incorrectly. That single phrase sharpened Holmes' attention. In what sense? Like a reflection that doesn't match the body. A pause. Holmes exchanged a glance with me. Finch continued desperately. There are lights beneath the bridge. Yes, Holmes said quietly. I saw them once before I was shot. What kind of lights? I don't know. Describe them. Finch hesitated. Greenish. A silence followed. Holmes stood abruptly. Green. He turned toward me. Phosphorescence. Lestrade frowned. What are you suggesting? Holmes paced. Not supernatural projection. Then what? A controlled optical phenomenon, using gaslight reflection and river sediment, I said slowly. Holmes nodded. Very good, Watson. Lestrade looked unconvinced. You are explaining ghosts with science. I am explaining deception with science. Holmes' voice sharpened. And deception is precisely what we are dealing with. We left the hospital with renewed urgency. As we stepped into the street, Holmes suddenly halted. Watson. Yes? Recall the brass fitting. On the bridge? Yes. It vibrated before the apparition. Holmes nodded. Which implies activation. Of what? He looked toward the Thames. A system. A pause. Then he added, Gaslight Bridge is not merely a location. It is a mechanism. That night, Holmes worked without rest. At approximately 2 a.m, he suddenly called me downstairs. I found him surrounded by sketches. Diagrams, reconstructed layouts of the bridge. His eyes were bright with intensity. I have it. What? Holmes pointed to a drawing, a cross-section of the bridge structure. Beneath the walkway, he had marked several compartments. What are those? I asked. Holmes replied quietly. Hidden housings. For what? He did not answer immediately. Instead, he produced the ledger again, opened it to a specific page, and placed his finger upon a single repeated annotation. Across multiple entries, one phrase appeared. Delivered to substructure. Gaslight site. My blood ran cold. Substructure? Holmes nodded. Under the bridge. Lestrade, who had been summoned again, looked horrified. You're suggesting someone lives beneath it? No, Holmes corrected. Someone operates beneath it. By dawn, Holmes had made his decision. We return. Now? I asked. Now, Lestrade protested. We need reinforcements. Holmes shook his head. If we wait for reinforcements, the final target dies. Vale? Holmes hesitated. Or whoever is using Vale. The distinction unsettled me. Gaslight Bridge greeted us under heavy fog. This time, however, Holmes did not stop upon the surface. He moved directly to the eastern side, where the brass mechanism had been discovered. He knelt, examined the metal, then located a barely visible seam in the structure. Here, he said. Lestrade frowned. A rivet, Holmes pressed firmly. The metal shifted. A panel released, slowly, silently. Beneath the bridge, a narrow stairwell descended into darkness. Lestrade stepped back. Impossible. Holmes did not hesitate. He began descending. I followed immediately. The air grew colder with every step, damp, metallic, unnatural in its stillness. At the bottom, a corridor stretched beneath the river itself. Walls lined with pipes, wires, reflective panels. Holmes moved forward cautiously, then stopped. Ahead, a faint glow pulsed, greenish. The same colour Finch had described. Holmes whispered, "So it is real." Lestrade raised his lantern. The light revealed something extraordinary. A chamber. And within it, mechanical apparatus, mirrors, gas lamps arranged in precise geometric alignment, and a central observation platform overlooking the underside of the bridge. Holmes stepped forward slowly, then froze, because someone was already there, standing in the glow, waiting. Sir Reginald Vale, but not alone. Behind him stood another figure, one we had not yet encountered, and Vale spoke quietly. "You should not have come below the river, Mr. Holmes." Holmes stared. Then explain what I am seeing. Vale's expression was grave. You are seeing the truth behind Gaslight Bridge. A pause. Then he added, and the final stage of the experiment. Chapter 12. The Experiment Beneath the Thames. The chamber beneath Gaslight Bridge was silent, in a way that felt unnatural. Not the silence of emptiness, but the silence of controlled absence. Like a room deliberately designed to suppress sound. Sir Reginald Vale stood before the apparatus as though he had been waiting for us all along. Behind him, the second figure remained still, half hidden in the greenish glow of the gaslit machinery. Holmes did not speak immediately. His gaze moved across the room with rapid precision. Mirrors, gas regulators, reflective plates angled toward the underside of the bridge above, a system of lenses suspended from iron supports, and beneath it all, a narrow platform extending toward the river's foundation. At last, Holmes broke the silence. An elaborate deception. Vale shook his head slowly. No, Mr. Holmes. Then what? A controlled observation. Lestrade let out a short laugh. Observation? You murdered men for observation. Vale's expression hardened. I did not murder anyone. The words were delivered calmly. Too calmly. Holmes stepped forward. Blackthorne is dead. Yes. Crow fell from his window. Yes. Marlowe and Finch were attacked. Vale nodded once. All true. Then you expect us to believe these are coincidences? For the first time, Vale hesitated. I expect you to understand causation does not always equal intent. Holmes' eyes narrowed. Explain. Vale gestured toward the apparatus. This system was installed after 1874. After the wreck? Yes. By whom? Vale's voice lowered. The circle. A silence followed. Even Lestrade stopped speaking. Holmes walked slowly around the chamber, examining every detail. His movements were controlled, but I recognized the intensity beneath them. You are telling me, Holmes said finally, that 4 men constructed this apparatus. Correct. And used it for what purpose? Vale exhaled slowly. To study perception. Lestrade scoffed. Perception? Vale turned toward him. You saw a dead man on the bridge. I saw an illusion. Exactly, Holmes interjected sharply. You mean you engineered it? Vale nodded. We refined it. The words hung in the air. Holmes stopped walking. Refined? Vale gestured upward. The bridge is the stage. And beneath it? The control room. Holmes' expression darkened. You created a mechanism to project figures onto the bridge surface. Not projection, Vale corrected gently. Reconstruction. I frowned. Reconstruction of what? Vale looked at Holmes. Memory. A long silence followed. Even Lestrade seemed unsure how to respond. Holmes spoke slowly. You are suggesting that what we saw is influenced by recorded data. Data from 1874. Vale nodded. The incident was not fully documented. Because of the wreck? Yes, but fragments were recovered. Holmes's eyes sharpened. The ledger, among other things. The second figure finally moved, stepping forward into the light. A younger man, well-dressed, clinical in appearance. A scientist, I realized. He addressed Holmes directly. You are familiar with optical persistence? Holmes did not respond. The man continued. The human brain reconstructs incomplete visual information. Yes. Under controlled conditions, we can guide that reconstruction. Lestrade muttered. This is madness. Holmes ignored him. What is your objective? Holmes asked. The scientist replied without hesitation. To recreate events that occurred at sea in 1874. My breath caught. Recreate them how? Visually. Vale added quietly. So they can be observed. Holmes turned sharply. Observed by whom? The scientist answered. By us. A pause. Then Holmes said, and the victims. Vale's expression tightened. They were never supposed to be victims. Lestrade stepped forward angrily. They are dead men. Yes, Vale admitted. But not because of this system. Holmes' voice hardened. Then explain their deaths. Vale hesitated, then spoke. Someone interfered. The statement changed the atmosphere instantly. Holmes' eyes narrowed. Interfered how? Vale gestured toward the machinery. The system requires calibration. Calibration using living subjects? No. Then what? Observation triggers. Holmes became still. Explain. The scientist stepped forward again. The bridge reacts to memory fragments embedded in the ledger. Fragments? Encoded entries. Holmes turned toward the ledger in his coat. His expression changed. Understanding began to form. You used the circle's records as input. Yes. Lestrade looked bewildered. You are saying this thing shows memories? Vale shook his head. It reconstructs probability. Holmes corrected him instantly. It reconstructs belief. A silence followed. Suddenly Holmes turned toward the apparatus. Show me. Vale frowned. What? The last recorded event. The scientist hesitated. We are not fully calibrated. Holmes stepped closer. You have already used it. Vale did not deny it. Yes. On Blackthorn. Another silence. Holmes's eyes sharpened dangerously. You simulated his death. We attempted to replicate his final recorded position, and the system killed him. Vale reacted sharply. No, but the hesitation betrayed him. Holmes understood immediately. It misfired. The scientist lowered his gaze. The subject was not supposed to be physically present. Lestrade looked horrified. You experimented on a living man, Vale replied quietly. We tested perception boundaries. Holmes' voice turned cold. And you lost control. A sudden sound echoed above us. A metallic vibration. The entire chamber trembled faintly. Holmes looked upward. What now? The scientist stepped back. It's active. Vale turned sharply. No. Who triggered it? Lestrade raised his weapon. Everyone stopped moving. But Holmes was already walking toward the central platform. Watson, he said quietly. Yes? Do not look away. I did not understand. Then the system activated. The green light intensified. Mirrors shifted. The air above the chamber shimmered. And once again, Gaslight Bridge appeared. Above us. Not physically, but visually reconstructed in perfect detail. And on it stood a figure. Sir Reginald Vale, alive, walking, exactly as before. Then another figure appeared beside him, Blackthorn. The moment repeated, but now it was not an illusion performed for us. It was a replay of the original event. Holmes whispered, So this is what actually happened. Vale stepped back, shaken. No, this was not meant to be accessible. But Holmes was no longer listening. His attention was fixed on the reconstructed scene, because something had changed. A third figure appeared, one that had never been accounted for, a man standing between the recorded memories, not part of the circle, not part of the system. And Holmes' expression tightened, because for the first time, the mystery was no longer about the past. It was about the present operator controlling what was being shown. And that operator was standing in the room with them. Holmes slowly turned and said one sentence. The murderer is not recreating history. He paused. He is editing it. The chamber fell into absolute silence, and in that silence, the truth finally began to surface. Chapter 13. The Case of Gaslight Bridge. The Truth Revealed. For several seconds after Holmes spoke, no one moved. The murderer is not recreating history, he had said quietly. He is editing it. The words hung in the air beneath the Thames like a verdict awaiting execution. The green-lit reconstruction above us still flickered. Gaslight Bridge suspended in impossible clarity, a frozen moment of the past continuing to play out like a living memory. But now it had changed, because Holmes had seen what none of us had seen before. A correction, a revision, a deliberate insertion into the sequence of events. And that meant only one thing. The system was not merely scientific. It was being guided, controlled, directed by a human will inside the chamber. Holmes turned slowly from the projection toward the apparatus itself. His eyes were fixed now, not on the illusion above us, but on the structure that created it. "You have a fourth operator," he said. Vale's face tightened. "That is impossible." Holmes stepped closer to the control console. "No," he replied calmly. "It is inevitable." Lestrade looked between them. "What are you talking about?" Holmes did not look at him. "3 men designed the system," he said. "1 man is maintaining it." The scientist's voice sharpened. "There is no fourth." Holmes pointed at the ledger resting in his coat pocket. "Then explain how entries were modified after Blackthorne's death." Silence. A very specific silence. The kind that does not deny accusation, but searches for justification. Holmes continued. "The ledger was not merely financial. It was operational. It contained triggers, sequence markers, calibration data." He looked at Vale directly. "And someone has been updating those markers." Vale exhaled slowly. "You do not understand the danger of what you are implying." "I understand it perfectly," Holmes said. A pause. Then Holmes stepped toward the projection field. "Show me the 3rd man." Vale stiffened. "There is no 3rd man." Holmes turned slightly. "You are lying." Lestrade frowned. "3rd man?" Holmes spoke without looking at him. "The apparition on the bridge." I felt a chill spread through me. Holmes continued. "We saw Blackthorne. We saw Vale. But there was a 3rd presence embedded in the reconstruction." He pointed upward. "Not part of the circle." His gaze narrowed. "Someone outside the original experiment." The scientist spoke quickly. "That is not possible. The system only reconstructs registered—" Holmes interrupted him. "Registered inputs. Yes, from 1874. He stepped forward. "But someone has added new inputs." Vale's expression darkened. "You are accusing us of sabotage." Holmes shook his head. "No." A pause. "Adaptation." And then he said it. "Someone learned how to use your system after it was built." The words landed like a hammer. Lestrade looked confused. "You're saying someone else took control of this machine?" Holmes nodded. "Yes." "And used it to kill?" Holmes' voice lowered. "Not directly." He turned toward the projection again. "Indirectly." The green light flickered more intensely. Above us, Gaslight Bridge shifted. The reconstructed scene began to replay again, but differently. Holmes narrowed his eyes. "There," he whispered. The 3rd figure appeared again. But this time it lingered longer, stepped closer, interacted with Blackthorne. Holmes raised a hand. "Stop the system." Vale hesitated. The scientist looked alarmed. "We cannot interrupt mid-sequence," Holmes snapped sharply. "Do it." For a moment no one moved. Then Vale made a decision. "Shut it down." The lights faltered, the projection flickered violently, the bridge distorted, and for a brief moment we saw something behind it. Not memory, not reconstruction, but reality. A second layer of imagery, something superimposed. Holmes's eyes widened. There, the system shut off completely. Darkness fell. Only the emergency lanterns remained. Holmes turned slowly. "Now I understand." Lestrade stepped forward. "Understand what?" Holmes spoke quietly. "The bridge was never the weapon." A pause. "The system is not killing people." He looked at Vale. "It is revealing them." Vale stiffened. "That is not possible." Holmes continued. "You built a device to reconstruct past perception events." "Yes, but someone discovered how to inject new observational data," the scientist whispered. "That would require access to the core ledger encoding system." Holmes nodded. "And someone had it." Vale shook his head. "No one outside the circle ever did." Holmes's voice sharpened. "That is where you are wrong." He turned. "Because one man survived the circle who was never recorded as surviving." A silence followed. Lestrade frowned. "Who?" Holmes answered without hesitation. "Arthur Finch, the wounded clerk, the witness, the man who had been shot before revealing everything." Vale shook his head slowly. "He was not a member." Holmes nodded. Exactly. Then he added, he was a record keeper. A silence followed. Holmes continued. He worked in Blackthorne's office. He handled correspondence. He saw the ledger. But he was never officially part of the circle. His eyes narrowed. Which meant he was invisible to your system. The scientist realized it first. He could alter inputs without being detected. Holmes nodded. And reconstruct events using partial access. Lestrade frowned. But Finch was attacked. Holmes turned. Yes. By whom? Holmes's answer was immediate. The circle. Vale stepped forward sharply. That is impossible. He was not a threat. Holmes's voice dropped. Then why did he know the phrase, the circle? Silence. A long silence, Holmes concluded quietly, because he was not just observing the system, he was rewriting it. At that moment, a sound echoed from above, a slow mechanical restart. The system flickered back on without authorization. Vale spun. I did not reactivate it. The scientist stepped back. No one did. Holmes looked upward sharply, and then we saw it. The bridge reappeared. But it was not empty. Arthur Finch stood upon it, alive, uninjured, watching downward, smiling. Lestrade shouted, "But he's in the hospital!" Holmes's voice was calm. No, he was never there. The projection intensified. Finch raised a hand, and below us, the chamber began to mirror the image, not reflecting it, synchronizing with it. Holmes stepped forward. "He is inside the system," Vale whispered. "That is not possible," Holmes replied quietly. "It is if he never left it." A realization struck me. Finch never stopped observing the experiment. Holmes nodded. He became part of it. Lestrade looked horrified. "You're saying he's controlling it," Holmes corrected him. "I am saying he is the final operator." The bridge above shimmered violently. Finch's image flickered, and then he spoke, though no sound should have reached us. Yet it did. Clear. Perfect. "You were not supposed to understand," the voice said. Holmes did not move. "But I always do," he replied. Finch smiled. "You are too late, Mr. Holmes." Holmes stepped closer. "For what?" the voice echoed again. "For the correction." Suddenly the system surged. Green light flooded the chamber. The bridge above collapsed into pure distortion. And then, a final image appeared. Not Blackthorne, not Vale, not Finch, but Holmes himself, standing on Gaslight Bridge, alone, and falling. Lestrade shouted, "Holmes!" But Holmes did not react. Instead, he said quietly, "So that is your end state." A pause. Interesting. The projection flickered again, but Holmes had already turned away from it, because he had seen what mattered. The control signature embedded in the system pulse. And it was not Finch. It was not Vale. It was not the circle. Holmes spoke softly. "It is a user who never signed the ledger at all." He turned. "Watson." "Yes?" Holmes' eyes were sharp. "Who first reported the stranger on Gaslight Bridge?" I hesitated. "Mr. Mercer." Holmes nodded. "And who was Mercer?" A pause. Then understanding struck me. "He was the first witness." Holmes finished. "The first input." A silence followed. Holmes concluded, "He was never a witness. He was the beginning of the system." The chamber's lights began to fail. The apparatus powered down permanently. The illusion above us dissolved. Gaslight Bridge vanished, and with it, so did the impossible man who had never truly existed. When we returned to the surface, dawn was breaking over the Thames. The bridge stood silent, ordinary, unremarkable. Lestrade would later file the case as an extraordinary technological fraud. Vale would disappear from public record within weeks. The circle's history would dissolve into legal obscurity, but Holmes said very little on the journey back. Only once did he speak. As we crossed Westminster Bridge, he looked out over the river and said, "It was never about resurrection, Watson." "Then what was it about?" Holmes adjusted his coat. "Control of what people believe they saw." A pause. "And once belief can be controlled," he trailed off. "But I understood." Because the truth of Gaslight Bridge was not that the dead returned. It was that perception itself could be rewritten. And somewhere in London, Holmes knew, the principle behind it would not remain buried for long. The game had ended, but the experiment, like all dangerous ideas, had only just begun.